Hello. Just would like to spend a couple of minutes going over counting for you. Another question lots of parents wonder, what should my child be able to do as far as being able to count, being able to recognise numbers? So I'll show you the most important counting skills we'd like you to practice with your child and explain to you which numbers we'd like your child to be able to recognise and why recognising the numbers isn't as important as being able to actually count the objects and understand the meaning of each number. So nursery children, forget about recognising numbers for now, okay? The most important thing your child needs to learn is to have a real understanding of what each number means. So if I was to say to your child, could you go and get me 3 apples please, that your child would be able to count out 3 apples, could retain that, and then bring me those 3 apples back. Okay, so that's something you can practice around the house all of the time. Depending on the stage your child is up to, you could do 1 object, you could do 2. Start off saying, could you go and get me 1 fork, please? We're going to set the table for dinner. Could you get me 1 fork? So send your child off to the drawer. You might think it's a really easy thing to do, but actually your child has got to retain that instruction in their head, retain the number that you've asked for, count that number out, and then bring it back to you. So there are actually lots of stages involved in that. And if your child comes back to you and has completely forgotten what you've asked them to do, then you know you need to keep it really simple and really basic for them and keep working on that 1-step instruction with 1 item. If your child can do that, fine, you can move on to 2. Can you go and get me 2 forks, please, from the drawer? So they have to retain that number, go off to the drawer, count out those 2 forks, bring them back to you. And what you'll notice is, as your child gets older and as your child is a more proficient counter, your child will be able to pick up 2 objects without actually having to count them. Young children, to begin with, don't have that idea of what 2 is yet, so if you ask them to get you 2 items, they will need to go 1, 2 and count those out. Okay, moving on to 3 objects, moving on to 4, once your child is able to do 1 and 2. Okay, so that's one way you can ask your child to go and count out objects for you and retain that number. You can give your child a group of objects and ask them to count them. And again, this is something that you might assume is easy, but actually for lots of children it's really quite difficult because they have to have an idea that as they're saying each number name, they're referring to a different object within the set. So what you'll often find children will do, give them 5 apples and you ask them to count how many apples we've got. They will start sometimes from one end, sometimes randomly in the middle. Encourage them to start from the end of the set and they will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 apples. Because your child hasn't yet grasped the idea that each number name refers to the next item in the set. So definitely start off with 3. Okay? 3 is enough. And get your child to have an idea of what 3 looks like. So spread them out. Are there still 3? Move them around. Are there still 3? Okay? Hide them all behind my back. How many have I got behind my back? Still 3. Even though they can't see them, there's still 3 there. Okay, so get them to have an idea of what 3 is. Do the same with 2, the same with 1. Ask them to pass you from that group 1 apple. Ask them to pass you 2. And then encourage your child to count them with you. So you can model it starting at one end. 1, 2, 3. You can get your child to do it with you and you can take a different amount of time moving your finger so they've got an idea that they can't say number 2 until you're actually touching that second object. So you can go 1, 2, 3. Take one of the objects away. How many have we got now? Ask your child to count them. So focusing on up to 3 to begin with. Move up to 5 then, okay? So with those 5 objects, we encourage the children, if they have a group of objects like this, to move them as they count and to try to put them into a line if possible. Not always possible because they might be counting pictures, but to do something so they know which ones they've already counted. So if they were drawn on a piece of paper, I'd maybe encourage a child with a pencil just to mark off each one as they count them so they're not counting the same ones over and over again, and that conservation of number is really important. So in this situation I would say, right, I'm going to count the apples. Let's see how many we've got. We'll do it together. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you might find your child can do that. They can move them from one place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They can do that fine, but then you ask them to check and they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sometimes that can be rushing and just being a little bit lazy. Sometimes it's still that they haven't quite grasped that they need to be counting the group accurately. So just keep going over little things like that. Every now and then, random household objects. If you're in the garden, let's see if we can find 5 stones doing that. Then, once your child is really good at that and you think they've got it securely, go for a larger number. Give them a big group, ask them to sort them out. When your child's a good counter and you feel they're very confident with this, you can start thinking then a little bit more about the numbers. Okay? The reason I don't want you to do this to begin with is quite often people focus so much on getting their child to recognise a number that they forget that the important part is actually having an idea of what that number means. I'd rather your child be able to do that and not recognise the numbers, because they'll get that in a flash. You've got to keep working on the counting element with them. So recognising the numbers, obviously start off with 1, 2 and 3. Don't move on until your child is really, really familiar with those, and it might take them a long time. Some children find it very difficult to retain the abstract number shape, and that's absolutely fine. I've got some rhymes that I'll put for you in your pack, so you'll be able to use those with your children to help them to remember how to form that number. But it might take them a long time. Please don't worry, that's completely normal. Okay? So starting with numbers 1, 2 and 3. I've given you some number cards, but you can just draw them on scraps of paper like I have here. That's absolutely fine. So I'm going to find my numbers 1, 2 and 3. And I'm going to be teaching my child those first of all, looking at the shape of them and then matching objects to that number. So this is number 1. Can we put one of our hearts next to number 1? Okay. This is number 2. Might not recognise it yet. You can tell them, can we put 2 hearts next to number 2? And then the same with number 3. You can pin them up next to their bed, encourage them to take it around the house and find the right number of objects for it. Hide them around the house and get your child to find them, whatever it takes. Move on to 1 to 5 once they're familiar with up to 3. Sometimes they might not recognise any of the numbers apart from maybe number 4, because they know that's their number, that's how old they are. Again, brilliant. Just encourage them to look for numbers all around us. And then once your child could do up to 5, move on to up to 10 and then up to 20. Ordering the numbers, again, another tricky thing. They might recognise them, but they might not have any clue that there's a particular order that those numbers go in, starting from smallest to largest. So encourage your child to put them into the right order, as well as match the objects to them. Number songs, I'm sure you can look up online and find lots and lots of number songs. We'll be teaching you some of them as we go through the weeks as well. Anything to encourage your child just to play with numbers in a fun way. The last thing you want to be doing is sitting down, making your child recognise them in a really boring way, making your child write them. Don't worry about that yet, that's not important yet at all. Just focusing on that counting, bringing it into everyday life and making it fun for your children. Okay? Any questions? You know where I am.